good evening. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today I'm very pleased and honored to have with me as my guest Dan Ariely, who's a behavioral economist, an author, a TED speaker, also a professor at Duke University. Dan, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So Dan, let me start by asking you, when someone asks you, what do you do or what is your area of research, how do you describe it in your words?
Well, it depends. It depends when. I give lots of different answers depending on who is sitting next to me on the flight or, how much I want to get into a discussion. But generally, I say that I examine what causes people to misbehave and what can we do about it. So I think that, in standard economics, there are kind of two sides to economics. There's the descriptive side and there's the prescriptive side. There's a part of economic theory saying we're describing human nature. That's the descriptive side. And there's a part that says we're going to tell you how to run your life, how to create tax systems, hospitals, anything, right? And behavioral economics is kind of the same thing from that perspective. It says there's a theory that is describing human behavior, not the same way that economic theory does, but we look at all kinds of irrational quirks of human behavior. But then there's also the prescriptive side that says, so how should we run our life, given the human quirks that we have?
Now, how did you get into this area, or what was the genesis of how you started studying this stuff?
So I started very much from kind of an interest to fix things. So I was burned very badly when I was young, about 70% of my body, and the hospital I was in gave me lots of opportunities to observe what I thought was inappropriate, or later I thought of it as irrational, but at that point I just thought was like wrong behavior. And I wanted to do things better. And initially I wanted to be a physician. I thought, the right way to do things in a better way would be to become a physician myself. But because my hands were so badly burned, I couldn't. I went to interview in a medical school, and they said they can't take me. I couldn't hold a knife. I mean, there's lots of things that physicians do that I couldn't just do.
A blessing in disguise, perhaps?
Yeah, maybe. So I actually started studying math and physics, and then I realized that because I couldn't use my hands, I couldn't hold a pencil or a pen. I couldn't solve math problems. I couldn't do that. So I decided to study philosophy and psychology. I thought something I don't really have to use my hands that much. And then I kind of fell in love with psychology. I fell in love with this idea that you can understand human nature, you can ask questions, and you can try to do things in a better way. And it was about the time when personal computers were becoming more popular and computer interfaces were getting to be part of how people were making decisions. And it was just an interesting period. And from there, I just kept on going.
So tell me the first interesting piece of research or the first sort of discovery that you made or experiment that you ran that, generated some interesting results. What was the first thing you came up with?
So the first thing I did when I was still an undergrad, so I had I had a professor who was also got badly injured. He was actually a very important person in my life. His tank went over a landmine, and he lost both of his legs. And he made his research topic pain. So he kind of took on his personal, experience with pain and made it into his profession, which was one kind of interesting thing, right? You can take your hobby or, it wasn't exactly hobby, but you could take something that you're personally engaged with and make it into your profession. But the second thing that he did, his name is Hanan Frank, that every time we had a question about something about how the brain works, it was a class on physiology of the brain, rather than telling us the answer, he said, how would you experiment with this? How would you test it? Which was a very interesting way to teach. But anyway, I had a connection with him. We were in the same hospital, many years apart, with some of the same physicians, some of the same nurses, and so on. So we had a connection. And one day I come to him before class, and I say, I just went to the dentist the first time since my injury, and I told him I don't need Novocaine. I said they had to drill to do a filling, and I said, it was painful, but I didn't care so much. And he said he's been doing the same thing for 30 years. going to a dentist without Novocaine. And we said, are we just enjoying pain? Are we different? Is it more common? So we went to, we started to test it out. So we went to a place that Army veterans go. It's like a country club, but only for people who were or are injured. And we did an experiment in which we asked people to put their hand in very hot water, tell us when the heat becomes pain. So if you put your hand in hot water, it's not painful immediately, right? It takes a couple of seconds for the heat to become pain, and we call this the pain threshold, when it becomes painful. And then we said, please keep your hand in there until you can't tolerate it anymore. And after 60 seconds, we asked everybody to take it out so we don't create burns. And we got a large group of people to do this task. And then we took their medical records and we went back to the hospital and we asked physicians and nurses to categorize the people into two groups. A group of people who had severe history with pain and a group that didn't. And we looked at what happened to the two groups. And what we found was that people who had severe injuries just had much higher pain threshold intolerance. They could basically keep their hand in hot water for much longer. And it took them much longer to interpret heat as pain. And this kind of fit our intuition that when you're in hospital for a very long time, you basically have a very different relationship with pain. Now, there was another interesting thing about this study. There were only two people, that were the opposite. Those people had very strong history of pain, but they were very, very sensitive to pain. And one of them had cancer, and one of them had terrible intestinal problems from an explosion. And the thing about those people, those two individuals, is that for them, pain signals getting closer to death. Right? If you think about somebody who's a cancer patient, for example, pain doesn't signal recovery. If you think about somebody like me or somebody like Hanan, every time we had pain, something was getting better. It was an operation, it was a treatment, it was something. And I think over time, we learned that pain is not just negative, but it also means something positive. There is some improvement that is connected to it. Whereas for these two people who had a cancer in the intestinal problem, there was nothing like this. For them, all pain was just things worse. So anyway, that was maybe the first. That was the first big study I did, and if you think about the elements, it was something about my personal experience that I was curious about, that I then went ahead and tested. I learned that, yes, something about my intuition was right, but I also learned something new and kind of opened new questions, because this idea that the people with the cancer and the intestinal problem had lower pain threshold intolerance basically suggests that it's not about the experience of pain. It's not about familiarity with pain. It's about the interpretation of pain. How do we interpret? And this idea that we can think about something in a cognitive way and reframe pain. By the way, most of my research now is not on pain. I do mostly stuff on financial decision making and health. But we are having a new project on pain that is kind of related. We've looked at professional athletes. We looked at cyclists, and we found a pattern that we call benign masochism. When, I don't know, do you cycle?
No, I don't.
Okay, I don't either. I tried it a few times, but it's a very painful sport because it's the same movement over and over and over for hours in the same muscle group against friction, right? Very, very hard. Some of these professional athletes told us that they sometimes just want to count to 30. They don't think about a mile. They say, I just want to last 30 more seconds. They say 30, 29, 20, and then it's another 30 seconds. So it's very, very tough. And what we found is that they're able to enjoy the pain. Now, it's not a craving in the way that you enjoy ice cream, but it is a kind of enjoyment that if they don't feel pain, they don't think they've done the right thing. They don't think they've done their job. And somehow the pain also means I've done something right. My muscles are improving. I'm working hard. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And what we're thinking now is, how do we take that reframing that they're so good at doing and use it for side effects? So one of the barriers for people taking the medication is side effects. And just the word side effect is terrible, right? Because unlike cyclists think that the pain is an inherent part of getting better. Whereas side effect says this is an inherent part of not what you want, right? It's not about what you want. And we're wondering whether we could help people reframe side effects in a less negative way. Like, I don't think we'll get anybody who goes to chemotherapy to crave vomiting, right? We're not going to get there, but can we get it to be less painful or less dreadful? I think the answer is yes.
So tell me a little bit about how you went from this initial pain experiment to the bulk of what you've been studying, or you're well-known studying, the whole thing about dishonesty and behavior and that sort of thing. How did it kind of go to that topic?
So another study I did at that time was the study that was informed by how to remove bandages from burn patients. Right? So you can imagine ripping bandages off quickly or taking them off slowly. And in my department, in the burn department in the hospital I was in, the nurses, actually in almost all burn departments, they had the theory that the right approach is to remove bandages off quickly. So, and I tested that, and it turned out that they were wrong. That if you take a painful experience and you make it longer, you don't make it much more painful. If you make it more intense, you make the perception of pain much higher. So the nurses were wrong. Actually, they were wrong in all kinds of ways. They were wrong in the sequence of pain. They should have started with the most painful and decreased pain over time. They were wrong with not giving me breaks. They were wrong in all kinds of ways. And what was interesting about this was not just that they were wrong, but that they had no idea that they were wrong. And they had very strong intuition that they were right. And from that point, I started thinking, what are the cases in which we basically have no good evidence, but lots of beliefs about how the world works, and we apply those beliefs over and over without questioning them. So, if you think about bandages, you can say, I just think it's the right approach to rip them off quickly. If you think about how do we deal with money, or what do we do with motivation, some of the research we've done recently is about motivation at the workplace. And if you say, what is the right way to reward people for hard work, what is the right way to price something? I mean, all of those questions, in many of them we don't actually question ourselves. We just have a strong belief, and we just do it time after time after time. And if our beliefs are wrong, it's not just that we're not getting the full benefit, we can actually create harm.
Well, tell me a little bit about what was the first piece of research that actually got some notoriety, or people really started saying, wow, you're onto something. What was the first experiment that sort of achieved that goal?
I don't know about notoriety, but I will tell you that there was, we started talking about pain, so I'm going to do more pain, but there's a prize called the Ig Nobel Award. Do you know the Ig Nobel Award? Oh, it's a funny award, but it's a award for research that first makes you laugh and then makes you think, and it's a beautiful thing. When I was a student, I went to the Ig Nobel Awards once. It's at Harvard, and there was a guy that showed that the toast does fall with the butter side down more frequently. And you look at this piece of paper and you say, this paper, and you say, this is a funny piece of research. But the reality was, it was a very complex paper in physics about objects that were with an uneven distribution of weight. And he described it with the toast, but of course it's a much more general question. But I thought this is beautiful, right? It's beautiful to think about something that is deep and complex and important, but you're presenting in a way that fits our model of the world, and you can actually think about it in a particular way. So anyway, I got that prize once for research showing that expensive placebos work better than cheap placebos. So what we did was we invented a fake medication called Valadon RX. We got people to come to the lab. We connected them to a machine. We gave them some electrical shocks. And we measured how much pain they could take. And then we gave them Valadon RX and gave them 15 minutes for it to work. But of course, it was just placebo. And then we tested again. And what we saw was that placebo worked, right? So when people get the medication, their pain tolerance goes up. They can tolerate more electrical shocks. But we had 4 medications, a version of the medication, which of course they were all the same, but we told people something different about them. We had an expensive American version, cheap American version, expensive Chinese version, cheap Chinese version. So 2x2 design, expensive versus cheap, Chinese versus American. And what we found was that the Chinese versus American didn't make a difference, right? And I think because kind of Chinese medication has its own kind of magic or expected magic. But expensive versus cheap worked, had a big difference. And the expensive ones worked much better. Now, just to be clear, placebos are all about expectation. Placebo is really an amazing effect. So if you have a physician who injects you with saline water, with IV fluid, what happens is that your body is expecting pain relief, and your body is secreting its own pain relief. So we have a substance in our brain that is opioids, very much like morphine, but internal, and we start secreting it. Now you can't close your eyes and say, please, 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 I want some pain relief. But if you expect something to happen, your body automatically starts secreting it, right? Our body basically, our brain always tries to predict the future and prepare for that future. And that's what placebo is. Placebo is about the fact that you have some expectations, and our expectation shape our physiology. By the way, there was a recent study which I love, showing that when the advertising for asthma medication was more effective, the medication was more effective as well. So, right, because it is a story about expectations. So now, and of course, lots of things create expectation. The shape of the pill, injections create higher placebo effect than gel capsules, and they create more placebo effect than regular pills. Somebody with a white coat is more effective than somebody without a white coat. And price is the same thing, right? The moment something is expensive, you expect it to be better. The moment when something is cheap, in a non-conscious way, you just expect it not to be as good, and then it actually has fulfilling prophecies.
Now, when did you get to the experiment that was the subject of that movie, The Truth About Dishonesty, and that terrific test about cheating and stuff? How did that come about in your research?
So actually I've been studying dishonesty for a while, and it started again from kind of a personal experience. I was on one of those flights, and I was bored looking at the flight magazine. And it was one of these Mensa tests. And the test is on page 17, and you look at the first question, it says answer on page 170. And I look at question 1, I think I know the answer. I look at the page 174, whatever it is in the back, and I don't remember if I thought I was right or wrong. But then I realized that as I was going through this process, I was glancing at the next answer, right? And then when I got back to page 17, every time I said, oh my goodness, I'm a genius. Now, that test proved I was a genius, but I was cheating, right? And I was cheating myself. And I thought, when I was going through the process, I didn't think I was cheating. But I kind of was cheating. And I started thinking about dishonesty more generally, and our capacity to cheat ourselves, and not to think of ourselves as cheaters. Because in general, when you do these Mensa tests like this, you don't think of yourself, oh, I'm a cheater. You just think I'm a genius. Very quickly, you convince yourself that you're a genius. So I did my first experiment on cheating, and it wasn't with the Mensa test. It was something different. And then, as I was starting to become interested in this, Enron happened. And Enron was an interesting story because in the beginning there was this belief that there were just three bad apples, right? Here's a company with three bad apples. But I was teaching at MIT at the time, and I already finished my first studies on dishonesty, and I saw lots of cheaters. In fact, in my data, I tested hundreds of students. There was no big cheater, and there were lots of little cheaters. And I said, the theory in Enron is that there's a bad apple, but I don't see bad apples. I see lots of little, blemished apples. And I said, could it be that our theory of dishonesty is wrong? That it's not about big bad player. It's about all of us have the capacity to be dishonest. So the next 10 years did lots of experiments on dishonesty. We have a few paradigms, but I'll tell you one of them. In one of them, we give people a die, a six-sided die. And we say, why don't you roll this die? We'll see what it comes up on. We'll pay you whatever it comes up on. Comes on 6, we'll give you $6, 5, 5, 3, 3, so on and so forth. But you can get paid based on the top side or the bottom, top or bottom. You decide, but don't tell us. So imagine I ask you, please pick top or bottom. Don't tell me, and you pick something up. And then you roll the die, and let's say the die came with 5 on the bottom and 2 on the top. And now I say, what did you pick? Now, if you picked bottom, no problem. You say bottom and you get $5. If you pick top, you have a dilemma. Do you say the truth, top, and get only $2? Or do you change your mind and say, oh, yeah, I really meant bottom and get $5? And in the experiments, people do this 20 times. And every time they think top or bottom, they say it in their mind, they don't say anything, they roll the die, they write down on a piece of paper, it came with 5 and 2, 6 and 1, 3 and 4, and then they say what they picked. And what happened is people are very lucky. People cheat a little bit. And then we find that what changes cheating? We find that lots of people cheat a little bit, but people cheat more if they can rationalize it. If people think that they were screwed before by somebody, or this is a payment for something, or everybody else is doing it, or this is moral, or if they don't get money, they get something else that then becomes money. There's all kinds of versions. Everything that gets people to rationalize gets people to cheat, to cheat more.
So now tell me, there's obviously infinite number of questions and things you can think about that you can test. And obviously, you have finite number of time, you have finite resources. How do you figure out what you're going to pursue? Because you must have 5 ideas, 10 ideas every day as you live your life and as you observe people that you could test or, try to figure out.
Yeah. So I had different phases of my life in that regard. In the beginning, I would look at what interesting for me is more theoretically. Later on, when I started writing things more in the popular press, all of a sudden I had opportunities to do field studies. So, when I was just working in the lab, I just did stuff that was interesting for me theoretically. Then all of a sudden people started approaching me and say, hey, let's test something in real life. And it was very exciting to try and have a real impact on behavior. And then a few years ago, I decided to try and focus a bit. So for the last 2 years, my research lab at Duke and we've been trying to focus on financial decision-making and health. How do we get people to spend less, save more, take less loans that are not good for them? And on the health side, we're trying to get people to exercise, diet, take the medication on time, stuff like that. So we're trying to focus on those things.
And why those things?
And if you think about what are the big ways in which there's kind of human waste, kind of tell me if I'm missing anything, but I think we're wasting our time, money and health, and then there's hate, which is like the fourth terrible waste. And I don't know what to do about hate. I mean, there's a little bit of research on this, but very, very hard to combat. I know some things about time, and we've been working on how to help people manage their time better. And health and money are the other big two. And most of the problem with health is is behavior. I was at a conference in Holland 2 weeks ago, and they tried to estimate what would be the improvement in life expectancy if people took their medications for cardiovascular problems, and what would be the effect if people ate better and exercised. And they estimated that it's 4-1 on that the effect of medication will be 20%, the effect of health and exercise is 80%, right? You look at this, you say, yes, let's just get people to behave better. It's the behavior that is the real problem. And the same is true for money, right? It's very hard to think about money the right way, so we think about it the wrong way and we make all kind of mistakes. So, we design the world without taking human limitation into account. Think about food. We're designing things like donuts and 2-liter bottle of Coke and Happy Meals and all kinds of things that are not necessarily good for us, but incredibly tempting. And on the financial side too, we're designing credit cards and Apple Pay and Android Pay and all kinds of things that get to spend more easily and making it hard for us to save. And as a consequence, we make mistakes. But if we understand better where we go wrong, we can also design different tools to get us to behave better.
Tell me, of all the experiments that you've run, or the questions that you pondered, which are there one or two maybe that leap out to you that surprised you the most, or was the most unexpected of all the experiments you've run?
So of course, with time, my research center at Duke, we call it the Center for Advanced Hindsight, is the official name, and we call it because in retrospect you can explain to yourself anything. But I'll tell you about one experiment that we did recently that surprised me. This was a study in Kibera, in a slum in Kenya, where we were trying to get very poor people to save a bit of money. And what we designed was a system where people could text money into their M-Pesa account, but every night the money would be transferred into the stock market. And we did it this way because we wanted them to have an easy time putting the money in, but a hard time taking it out. So they could text money in, but if they wanted it to get it out, they had to take a bus, go to the city, fill a form, wait an hour, take a bus back. It might take 4 hours. And we did this because we wanted people to have access to the money if there was an emergency, but we didn't want everything to become an emergency. So everybody got this system, easy in, hard out. And then we added things to it. Some people just got that system, the control. Some people got that system plus a weekly reminder that says, try and save 100 shillings, about $1 this week. Some people got the same text message, but as if it came from their kids. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. This is little Johnny, whatever the name of the kid was. Try and save 100 shillings this week. Some people got a 10% match. Save up to 100 shillings, we'll give you 10%. Some people got a 20% match. Two other groups also got 10% and 20%, but they got pre-match. What is pre-match? Pre-match is that we assume you will put the 100 shillings, and we put the 10 shillings or the 20 shillings into the account at the beginning of the week. And if you save, you get to keep it. If not, we take it back. This is based on the principle of loss aversion, the idea that people hate losing more than we enjoy gaining. So if you see money coming in, that's great. And leaving, that's terrible. So we said if people would see money leaving, they will start saving more. And then we had another group that we gave them a coin. And the coin had numbers on it, 24 numbers for the 24 weeks of the program. We asked people to put the coin somewhere in their hut, and then every week to take a knife and scratch the number for that week, week 1, 2, 3, 4, and scratch it one way if they didn't save, another way if they saved. Now, when we ask people, both in Kenya and the US, what they think would work, people say the 20%, then the 10%, and then everything else, because it's really about financial incentives. What actually happened was that the thing that really surprised us...
And did you think that also? Did you think that before you did the measurement?
I thought that loss aversion will be more important. I didn't think that difference between 10% and 20% will be large, but I assumed that the loss aversion would be the thing that would drive it. And there's two interesting things in the results. So here's the result. The results are that you give the system to people, they save. You add a weekly reminder, that savings jumps up. you add to it 10% at the end of the week, slight increase. 20% at the end of the week, just like 10%. 10% in the beginning of the week, slight increase. 20% beginning of the week, just like 10%. And kids were just like 10 and 20% with loss aversion, which was the first surprising thing, right? That they just, having a text from your kids is equivalent to 20% match plus loss aversion. But the real big surprise was the coin, because the coin almost doubled savings compared to everything else. And of course, the question is why? Now, I got the idea for the coin when I was in Soweto, different slum, and I saw a father buying funeral insurance. Funerals in Soweto are very expensive. Some people spend up to 2 years of income on funerals. So this father bought funeral insurance, and he got a certificate for a week, right? Because he doesn't have money, so he buys it for a week. He gets a certificate and in a very ceremonious way hands it to his son. And what I thought was that he was somebody who took something that was non-visible, right? If you're a breadwinner and you bring money home, what's visible is food and drinks and kerosene and stuff like that. Every time you save or buy insurance, the only thing the family really sees is that you're taking away things from them. But here this father was taking something invisible, insurance, and making it visible by giving the kid the certificate. And I thought that's a beautiful thing. You know, it used to be that people used to save in things like goats, right? 200 years ago. You saved in goats. You had some extra money, you would get another goat. And your neighbors could see how many goats you have, and you could compete on who has more goats. Now, when we are in the digital money, you have no idea what your neighbors are saving. By the way, you know, the only thing you know is how much they're spending. There was a recent paper that showed that when people win the lottery, their neighbors start spending more money, right? Because we compete on what we can see, which is spending. By the way, this study, if you think about it, it's surprising, which is kind of nice, but the other thing is it does bring up some really interesting questions. And for me, good studies are always like this, that you find something, but then you have more questions, and in particular you think about, okay, what does it tell us about the structure of society? Are there things that right now are invisible that we want to make more visible?
Obviously, there's so many questions that you could research, and every time you, as you mentioned, every time you research, more questions get asked. Do you ever think you don't have enough time to answer all the questions you want to research? Or do you think about that in any way, or do you think like it's just overwhelming as far as the number of possible things you could research and discover? Do you ever think about that?
All the time. So on an average day, I have all kinds of thoughts about things I should be studying,
or could be studying,
and some of them I feel I should be, and I just don't have time. So there's a new U.S. regulation now that every restaurant that has more than, I forget what, 20 branches need to post calorie information on all the items in the menu. And so far all the research we've done on calorie information showing that it doesn't matter. But now lots of restaurants will have to put calorie information. How will they do it? Will something change about food? How should they do it? What is there going to be any impact? Could there be any impact if we did something else? That's. I told you I was in South Africa. One of the questions is sugar tax, to tax sugary drinks. In the U.S., we have not been able to create this taxation. But what would happen if we created the taxation?
Does that depress you, thinking about all the things that you won't have time to ultimately research and study?
So I'll tell you. So it's a little depressing story, but some time ago, I got a call. I get lots of calls from injured people who want to talk about life after the injury. So I get a call from a guy he emails me. He said, "Please call me." I call him back. Uh, it turns out he's a quadriplegic, paralyzed from the neck down, and he wants to talk about how to find meaning in life. And we talk about some options, and then he asked me, what do I think about suicide? And I said, I'm not against it, but let's look at other options first. And then we talk once a week, and we try to track his progress and so on. And 4 months later, he does commit suicide. And after that, I started talking to more quadriplegics, try to understand kind of what gets some people to find meaning in life and some people don't. And there are many lessons from these discussions, but one of them is that some of the most successful quadriplegics that I've met change their focus of success. They don't think about the meaning of life. They think about, let me time myself and see if I can get dressed by myself. Right? So if you're a quadriplegic, by the way, getting dressed is not an easy thing. It could take 45 minutes. You have to kind of wiggle yourself in. There's a dressing stick. It's a very complex thing. But some of the most successful people, that's what they do. They basically say, here's my goal. I want to break my record. And they work on it. And I think the same thing is important for people who look at the world and see lots of challenges and sadness. My life is really full of lots of sadness. I mean, if you just go to any slum in the world, it's just too much to contain the amount of misery and sadness and pain and illness and cruelty. It's a tough thing, but I think, like these successful quadriplegics, I think about small steps forward. Can we solve poverty? I don't see that happening, but can we make steps forward? Absolutely, and we're making them. So I've kind of shifted, or maybe always had it, I'm not sure, but I'm kind of focusing on the steps that we can take, rather than looking at the magnitude of things we still need to improve.
Well, Dan, this has been a fascinating conversation. I could talk to you all night, but I really appreciate your taking time out of your busy schedule. I hope you can come back in a few years and tell me about what you're researching then.
With pleasure.
This is Richard Hsu and Dan Ariely. Thanks.